Coming up on Arirang News, North Korea has blown up the Inter-Korean liaison office in Gaeseong, a drastic escalation in tensions amid almost daily threats from the regime over the sending of propaganda leaflets from the South. South Korea announces that it's keeping its anti-dumping duty on stainless steel plates from Japan. Those duties, in place since 2011, have been extended another 3 years. And South Korea now has a big enough supply of face masks to raise the purchase limit to 10 a week per person. That starts Thursday. It's 5 p.m. here in Seoul. Thank you for joining us on Arirang News. I'm Devin Whiting. A developing story right now, North Korea has blown up the Inter-Korean liaison office at Gaeseong. Our Hong Yu is at the Unification Ministry in Seoul. Yu, we understand that the ministry has confirmed that the liaison office has been destroyed.
Yes, Devin, the Unification Ministry says North Korea has today blown up the Inter-Korean Joint Liaison Office in Gaeseong. A source from the South Korean military said there was explosion with smoke coming from the area around the Gaeseong Industrial Complex at 2:49 p.m. The Unification Minister, who was attending Parliament's Foreign Affairs Committee at the time of the explosion, said that he would look into more specific details. Reporters are currently waiting for a Unification Ministry press briefing. The demolition comes just 3 days after Kim Yo-jong, first Vice Department Director of the Central Committee of the Workers' Party of Korea, released a statement saying that the military would be involved if nothing was done regarding the anti-Pyongyang propaganda leaflets sent over the border by South Korean activists. She had also said that the South would soon see what she called the useless Joint Liaison Office be turned into rubble. The Joint Liaison Office was established following the Panmunjom Declaration 2 years ago when President Moon Jae-in and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un met at the demilitarized zone. The office was used to facilitate communication between the two Koreas and to support cooperation between civilians. I'll be back with more details in our later newscast, Devin.
All right, Hong Yu, thank you for that. We'll be looking forward to the updates. And now the North's latest threat this morning, it warned that it would send troops into border zones previously disarmed under the two sides' military agreements. Seoul's defense ministry says it's closely monitoring North Korea's movements and has urged the regime not to raise tensions further. Choi Won-jong reports.
The North Korean military has said it's considering plans to re-enter the border zone that was previously disarmed under the Inter-Korean Comprehensive Military Agreement, as well as spreading propaganda leaflets toward the south. The General Staff of the Korean People's Army released a public statement on the North Korean Central News Agency on Tuesday, in which it threatened to turn the front line into a fortress and further heighten military vigilance against South Korea. The North's recent statement follows a series of statements issued by Kim Yo-jong saying that the military will be in charge of the next step in the North's response to the distribution of anti-Pyongyang propaganda leaflets by South Korean activists. The North Korean army said it's considering plans to re-enter a border zone that was previously disarmed under military pact. It's also considering sending propaganda leaflets toward the south. In response, Seoul's defense ministry urged North Korea to stick to the principles of a 2018 Inter-Korean Comprehensive Military Agreement and refrain from raising tensions along the border.
We take this situation seriously. South Korea and the U.S. are closely monitoring North Korea. The South Korean military is in a full readiness posture and is prepared for any situation.
South Korean military sources see the North move as an attempt to nullify or undo some of the achievements of the military agreement. The South Korean media outlets view the North reference to the border zone to mean either the North City Gaeseong, home to the Shuttle Inter-Korean Industrial Complex, or the area near Mount Kumgang, where Inter-Korean tour programs had taken place until 2008. Choi Won-jong, Arirang News.
The International Atomic Energy Agency says there have not been any critical changes to North Korea's nuclear program as far as they can tell from satellite images. In a report Monday, the IAEA also emphasized that it's ready to verify Pyongyang's nuclear program once related countries come to a political agreement. Other researchers have a different view, though. The Stockholm International Peace Research Institute estimates Pyongyang has increased its stockpile of warheads over the past 12 months, while the total number held by countries around the world has dropped. It said the North has between 30 and 40 nuclear warheads, an increase of 10 from the year before. President Trump is cutting the number of U.S. troops deployed to Germany, and he says that won't be the only country to see cuts. Some experts say troops could also be withdrawn from South Korea, which is still in negotiations with the U.S. about how much it should pay to maintain them. Kim Do-yeon reports.
U.S. President Donald Trump says he will reduce the number of U.S. troops in Germany from around 34,500 to 25,000, confirming earlier reports on the move that raised concerns in Europe about U.S. commitment to the region. The president said it's because of Germany's failure to meet NATO's agreed defense spending target. He also claimed Germany is not practicing fair trade with the U.S. In 2014, NATO agreed that each of its 30 members should spend 2% of GDP on defense, but many countries, including Germany, haven't managed this. This could be alarming not just for NATO members, but also for other countries where U.S. forces are based. For example, the U.S. has more than 26,000 troops stationed in South Korea and 55,000 in Japan. For months, Seoul and Washington have been trying to come to an agreement over defense cost sharing, but they are at an impasse as Korea's foreign ministry proposed a 13% increase, whereas the U.S. demanded a 50% increase during the last renegotiations in March.
Considering the U.S. policy for the Pacific and China, the need for a reduction of U.S. troops in Korea is not high. Also, there are ongoing nuclear problems from North Korea. That being said, instead of cutting troops in the region, it's more likely they will pressure South Korea using this method to try to increase Korea's share of the defense cost.
In addition, due to the National Defense Authorization Act, U.S. forces in Korea cannot be reduced without the approval of Congress. However, former U.S. Ambassador to Berlin, Richard Grenell, recently said President Trump is very clear in bringing troops home from countries like South Korea, Japan, and other allies, which means the reduction of troops is not completely out of the question. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
The Finance Ministry has announced that South Korea is going to extend its anti-dumping duty on stainless steel plates from Japan for another 3 years. The tariff of 13.17% was first imposed for 5 years in April 2011 and then extended for another 3 years until last December. South Korea originally imposed the tariff because it found the Japanese product was sold here at artificially low prices, disrupting the local market. Stainless steel plates are used in the petrochemical, shipbuilding, and semiconductor industries. Time now for an in-depth look at the market news this afternoon, and for that I'm joined on the line by Mr. Daniel Yu, Global Strategist at Yuanta Securities. Mr. Yu, thank you as always for coming on today.
Thank you for having me today.
Well, this time yesterday, the futures on Wall Street were indicating another big decline, but despite fears of a second wave of the pandemic in the U.S., stocks were up overnight, partly on talk of more stimulus. What's the story in the global markets?
Yes, as you said, overall market fell quite sharply before in terms of the futures market, but after the market opened, it recovered quite nicely, and Dow Jones was up about 0.6%, S&P climbed up about 0.8%, and NASDAQ jumped by 1.4%. So if you look at the Dow Jones, it's like 700 points recovery. The main reason for that is because of the sentiment improvement after the Fed announced that it will start buying individual corporate bonds a month after announcing the purchase of ETFs only, basically adding the secondary market operation to the mix. If this continues, then clearly the investor trust towards the Fed remains quite strong despite all the concern about the COVID-19 issues. Most of the trigger for the decline that we saw earlier was due to the second wave possibility of COVID-19 that is spreading in U.S. as well as China. However, if continuation of the liquidity injection and government support remains, then we think that the market can have some more room to go up in the future. So therefore, most of the market were basically welcoming this type of the corporate purchase of these bonds and boosting measures done by the Fed.
Well, the bond buying measures you mentioned were welcome news here in Korea, where stocks were up more than 5% today on the Kospi, and in fact, they had to suspend trading for a little while. Tell us what happened on the Korean markets.
Yes, if you look at yesterday, it was exact opposite picture. With the futures market going down in the U.S. By almost 2-3%, Korean market start to fall quite sharply. And yesterday, market was down more than 5%. Kosdaq was down like 7%. So it was kind of repeat of what happened of Thursday of last week of U.S. market. However, today we saw a very strong recovery as we've seen because of the boosting measures expected from the U.S. as well as the Chinese government. Chinese basically said that they will do additional investment on a fixed asset investment project that amounts to 129.8 billion renminbi, which is very sizable. And it seems that the two power countries, the G2, U.S. and China, are quite obligated and saying that they will do all possible to boost the economy. So if that's the case, then Korea, who has very strong export-related industries and GDP structure, we expect the recovery could come through with these kind of boosting measures coming through the U.S. as well as China. So we think that a lot of issues kind of triggered the big losses yesterday, including the North Korea issues. But if you just look at the boosting measures and the government measures, and Korean government also indicating that they will do everything possible for supporting the economy, we think that the current trend of the equity rise should continue in the future.
Right, and it should be pointed out that by the time the news of North Korea's demolition of the liaison office, the Korean markets were already closed at that point. Now, let's talk about exports for a minute. They were down in May from a year earlier by 20%, but then in the first 10 days of June, we see they're up 20%. What do you make of these numbers?
Sure. As you said, May number was quite horrible, same as the April number. It was down by 23.7% year on year versus consensus of 22.1% for May. And if you're just looking at those numbers, then obviously the concerns are quite high, that economy is not recovering, that COVID-19 is here to stay, and it's a long-lasting effect. Those are all the worries that putting pressures for the global market as well as Korean market. However, though, as you said, if you look at the first 10 days of June, it soared, the export was soared by 20.2% year on year, which is a significant rise, and it is a positive indication and positive sign for the global demand. Obviously, the chip side is soaring. If you see the semiconductor business is doing really well, if that's the case, then the fourth industrial revolution is continuing to be happening, and the overall IT sector's recovery is on the right track. Of course, we are concerned about the consumption related in regards to the airlines, hotels, and other services, but that is related to COVID-19. But as far as the IT segment and fourth industrial revolution segment, it is doing very well, and Korea is very well positioned to those sectors. So if that's the case, then yes, we are concerned about the economic condition of global scale. But as far as Korea is concerned, Korea will be the lowest decline of GDP relative to any other countries. And if that's the case, then clearly foreign investors as well as domestic investors will look into Korea as positive in terms of the future equity market trend.
Got it. All right, Mr. Yu, we'll have to leave it there for today. Thanks so much for sharing your insights.
Thank you very much.
UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres says South Korea's COVID-19 response based on large-scale testing and tracing has become a model for other countries. The Blue House said Tuesday that Guterres sent a letter to President Moon Jae-in earlier this month, thanking him for demonstrating the importance of international solidarity. The UN chief also welcomed Seoul's plans for a Green New Deal in pursuit of clean and environmentally friendly economic initiatives. Guterres stressed that humankind prospers when it turns crisis into opportunity, and that to revive the economy, consumption must go hand in hand with climate change efforts. The South Korean government is going to invest more than $72 million this year to developing new medical equipment. The government will select 289 projects to invest in, including smart healthcare products based on AI and new cutting-edge respiratory virus test kits. This is part of the government's project to develop the biotech industry by 2025. It could also help Korea better control infectious diseases in the future. Starting this Thursday, people in South Korea will be able to buy up to 10 face masks per week under the public mask rationing system. That was announced today by the Ministry of Food and Drug Safety. The current limit is 3 masks a week for adults and 5 for minors. Also, the government's control of mask distribution, originally set to end on June 30th, has been extended to July 11th. Meanwhile, South Korea reported 34 new cases of COVID-19 on Tuesday, marking the 3rd day in a row the number of new cases has been in the 30s. Of the new cases, 21 were local transmissions and 13 were imported cases. 12 cases were reported in Seoul, 2 were in Incheon, and 5 in Gyeonggi-do province. And that brings us to the end of this newscast. Thank you for watching. More live news coming your way at 7 p.m. Korea time.